All right, y'all, welcome back. It is the continuation of the book of Colossians. We are working our way through the end of chapter 3 this week. I actually am a week behind. I was sick with a cold, one of those where like your eyeball starts to water and it runs down into your nose hole and makes you sneeze all over the place. So I didn't get anything recorded last week, so I'm a week off, but I've officially finished preaching through the book of Colossians and about to get into some the Gospel of Luke for the season of Lent. But we're going to finish up the end of chapter 3 and just one verse in chapter 4. A thing to remember is the chapter markers and verses, these weren't in the original. Those came just a few hundred years ago, and they are very helpful, but they don't always line up. And so we're going to look at Colossians 3, verse 18 through chapter 4, verse 1, because it continues in this household code. Before we get into it, it is important to remember where we've been, and I will reiterate this over and over because when the people originally would have heard this letter, they would have heard it all in its entirety. And then they would have went back and kind of referenced it, and probably a scribe or somebody would have copied it so that they could keep a copy for themselves and send a copy on what we actually find in chapter 4 to Laodicea and the church there. But as we look at this, we have to remember that we are talking the beginning, and especially chapter 1 and some of chapter 2, is Paul is focusing on the things that they know, trying to give them the right theological kind of mental outlook framework that Jesus is supreme above all things, everything, absolutely everything. Jesus is the most important. And this is groundbreaking for Jews, Gentiles alike, because they're all looking somewhere else. And so he hammers that part and then moves into kind of the struggles that they have and continues that with, now that I've given you the right thoughts about what to do, then here are the right actions. And we talked through that the last 2 times of before you can start putting on the good stuff, we don't go and run outside and get all sweaty or go to the gym and then come inside and then just put clean clothes on over top of our old clothes, over top of the sweaty clothes. We take things off, and he uses this analogy of take these off, put them off, and even put them to death before you put these new things on. And so take off all the anger, rage, malice, sexual immorality, those sort of things. Take those things off so that you can put on the compassion, the tenderness, the humility, the gentleness, and make sure you wrap them all up with love. And as he finishes that section, he then moves into this next section that for many people will go, yeah, that sounds pretty good. And if you are of a more progressive worldview, then this might cause you to pause a little bit. If you have bought into a lot of the feminism of the 1970s, 80s, 90s, then some of these you might not like the way that it sounds. But when you grasp it within its original context, Paul is really kind of breaking new ground against social, philosophical, societal norms of what was happening in his day. So what I want to do is actually give us that context and perspective of Paul is going to deal with household code and really just, okay, if you're going to put these good things on, where do you see them the most relevant is within your household. A household for us, modern day, is mom, dad, parents. Mom, dad, children, parents and the children. And that's about it. Occasionally you will find families where you will see mom and dad and the children and then grandma and grandpa at some point. And our society doesn't do that a whole lot. You see that more in kind of non-westernized countries or those that are very family oriented. You see this a lot in India and the Orient, and you'll see it in the Middle East. You'll see it in a lot of Spanish-speaking countries, especially Mexico and South America and some of these places. But you get into areas where the family is larger. Here, when we're thinking of household is kind of your sphere of influence, those that are directly with you, and that would include servants slash slaves within their context. We often, especially in the United States, only think of American and Caribbean, kind of the transatlantic slave trade sort of slavery. And that's not entirely what Paul is getting at. Slavery was a little different in the Roman world. It was similar in some ways and different in others. So we'll get into that in a minute. But before I read through, because Paul is going to talk about wives and husbands, he's going to talk about parents and children, and he's going to talk about slaves and masters. Now, we can look at this and go, why would he just pick those? Well, he wasn't the first one that decided to write about them, think about them, speak about them. That comes much earlier. So we're talking maybe 300-ish years before him. There is the can't talk today. Philosopher of the day, and that is Aristotle. Aristotle is the teacher of Alexander the Great, who lives in Macedonia, that's just north of Greece. And eventually, Aristotle's works become prolific, and a number of philosophers after him. But Aristotle is kind of the founding one of these household codes, or at least one of the earliest ones that we have something written down from. And his household codes go like this. I'm just going to read a little excerpt of these kind of things, and he's the one that gives us the framework of husbands and wives and parents and children and slaves and masters. He gives us the framework, and within that framework, then Paul uses it, but kind of flips it upside down or turns it on its head, so to speak. So this is Aristotle's household code from the 300s BC. The male is by nature superior and the female inferior. Now, this is probably a translation of ancient Greek, not Koine Greek that the New Testament is written in. So we could hear the man is superior in nature to the female is inferior. And the man rules and the female is ruled. The rule of the husband over the wife is political, not equal, but permanent and hierarchical, or established order underneath. The rule of the father over the children is royal, as in a monarchy. The children are incomplete in their reason and must be ruled for their own good. A slave is a living tool. Some people are slaves by nature, and it is better for them to be ruled. The master's rule is, this uses the word despotic, but I would use like tyrannical, but not in the you're a tyrant sense, but in the your rule is supreme, 100%, no questions asked, because then the next line is, it is not reciprocal. It is not a back and forth. Now, this is what is the typical of the day, and it's reiterated through other philosophers, but Aristotle is kind of the one that most look back to. As we get into things today, we're going to see Paul uses some of the same, he uses really the same framework, and expands on things and changes some things. And as we look at it, do note that as he writes Colossians, he will expand certain sections in particular. I believe here that he spends a lot more time on slaves and masters rather than wives, husbands, children that he will do in the book of Ephesians, because within the context of Colossae, you have the book of Philemon and the slave Onesimus, who ran away and is being sent back. He runs away, encounters Paul in the gospel, and becomes a brother in Christ, and then is sent back to reconcile with Philemon, who is the master. And so when we get into this, Paul's going to spend a little more time on slaves and masters than he does with the rest. Let's jump in. I will put a thing up on the screen over here so that you can check back with other things. Here we go. Okay. Verse 18. Wives, submit yourselves to your husbands as is fitting to the Lord. Now, that's just one verse. Wives, submit yourselves to your husbands as is fitting to the Lord. And you may read through that and go, oh, I kind of like that, or I don't really like that. The thing to keep in mind is we have to put our own modern assessment and judgments aside. This is very different to what Aristotle said. Aristotle said the rule of the husband over the wife is 100%. Here, Paul doesn't even use the word rule. He uses the word submission. And technically in the Greek, I believe that it is, we can pull it up here. Scroll down. I'm still in chapter 3, 14, 15. Where's 18? It takes a lot longer. There we go. So the Greek just says, the wives submit, and this is second person plural. So you, I guess you in present imperative passive. So be in submission to the husband, as is fitting in the Lord. When we look at this, the root of this word is hupotasso. Now, that shouldn't mean a whole lot to you other than the first part of that word, the hupo, or in English, we would do it hypo, H-Y-P-O, rather than the U that's there in the Greek. This is the same that we get our word for underneath, or the way that I like to explain this is I have to give one of my dogs has Addison's disease, and I have to give her a shot every single month, and you use a hypodermic needle. Hypo meaning underneath, and dermic or dermis underneath the skin. So it is a needle that goes underneath the skin. Here we get the same hypo, meaning underneath, and we get the other word tasso, which means to arrange things. This is the arrangement underneath of things. It is a military term. It is kind of how we would think of, you go into the military, you go into any form of service where there is someone that is in charge and it all comes down below, but they are all underneath the command of the mission, let's say. And I think it's appropriate. I'll break that down in a second for us in just more English terms. But hupotasso has the idea of arranging underneath, and think of rank and file within the military or within the police department or within the fire department, where there's somebody that is in charge and somebody else. We get all of this in anybody that does not work for themselves has this at their job. You report to someone. And it is not that they are against you, but they are for you because they want to get whatever the mission is, whatever the priority of the purpose is, all done together. But there is an order to these things. So when it says, wives, submit yourselves to your husbands, it does not say, wives, be ruled by them. It says that you are all coming under, now let's break it down in the English, sub, underneath, mission, underneath the mission. We are all coming underneath the mission, and you should ask yourselves, what is that mission? That mission that Paul elaborates when we get to the book of Ephesians, that mission is to Christ. Here, the way that Paul writes it is, as is fitting in the Lord. So I think it's appropriate here. The word fitting, I believe it means to like ascend or something. Let me look here. Is due, is becoming, is to attain something, that we are in submission underneath Christ's mission, that is, to the rest of the world and to how we are to relate to one another, that Paul laid a large chunk of that out of take off these things, put on these things, and if you are putting on the gentleness, the humility, the tenderness, the compassion, if you are putting on these things, then this is not a problem in your family system. It becomes a problem if you are people that still keep the old of sexual immorality and lust and anger and rage and all of those things. Then that becomes a problem. But here, following underneath the Lord, we are all underneath in submission to Jesus, who is at the right hand of God the Father in heaven. If we are all underneath that mission, then the easy flow here is that we are in submission to one another. Paul elaborates this as we are in submission to Christ, but here it is kind of just written within the text. He doesn't elaborate it fully because it's kind of understood. What it does tell us, what's very important, is husbands, you should be the type of man that is worth following. That you should be the type of man that is taking this serious. That it's not positional authority as Aristotle had. Here, Paul is taking the positional authority and raising the position to Jesus, that we are all underneath his authority. And within it, it is saying, we are doing this together, but here is kind of the rank and file, for lack of better terms, because this is a military term. But here, this is kind of how we are doing things, that within our society, this is the way that Jesus has intended things. Now, as we move forward, the first line, that's all you get. Let me go back to the English. The first line, 18, is just, wives, submit to yourselves to your husbands as is fitting to the Lord. We get to verse 19, husbands, love your wives and do not be harsh with them. Love your wives. We can read over this and go, that's the easy part. Why did the husbands get the easy one? Well, it's not exactly that easy. Because if we do look at love, and Paul emphasizes that at the end of his list here in Colossians, that love binds all of those, what he will later call fruit of the Spirit, and he'll elaborate in 1 Corinthians 13. We all know the love passage, and you've been to a wedding where they talk about agape love. There's a number of different types of love in the Greek, the brotherly love, the erotic love. They even have love for what we would call hospitality, love for someone that comes in like an outsider. Paul is pointing here and saying this is not just a word that's tossed around. This is not emotionalism, that I feel a great feeling inside towards my spouse, but this is love. This is self-sacrificial love. If we are in submission to Christ, then this love should be something that is desirable. It is something that is worth following after. The point that he makes with the men is not only love your wives, sacrificially, agape love, but he says, don't be harsh with them. Don't be harsh with them. And the Greek really says, don't make them bitter. Husbands, love the wives of you and not harsh. When we actually, let me find it, I'll zoom in here. To make bitter, embitter, to make them grow angry. The original intent here, I could click, I'll just click on it and see if I can find it in here. Don't exasperate, make bitter, pikros. I believe it means to, it could be don't irritate, don't cause bitterness, don't, the way that we would do this in the English, if you think of kids where they like poke at each other, they're constantly picking and poking. Paul is saying, don't be somebody that causes bitterness. Don't be somebody that creates that bitter situation. And the way that I explain this, that will probably turn some people's ears off, but it is a true stereotype at times. And untrue is we get this phrase, nagging wife. I know some of you go, I don't really like that you just said that. But it is true. It came from somewhere. And I would say that it comes from husbands being harsh, husbands causing bitterness. When the bitterness sets in, then everything is wrong. There is always something that is not right because you have created a relationship of bitterness. Paul is saying, do not create the situation where bitterness reigns, but love reigns. He moves on, verse 20, children, obey your parents in everything, for this pleases the Lord. Here again, the word obey is that same hupo root, but it means to listen underneath. Listen from below, that your parents have good things to tell you, and so listen to them. It doesn't say the same thing that Aristotle said. Well, kids are incomplete in the way that they think. That's kind of a nice way of saying your kids are dumb and you're smarter than they are, and so you should have them listen to you. While that is kind of cliche but true, the idea here is, children, make sure that you obey. This also, maybe I'll pause for a second. This tells you that the church was a full family gathering. So this letter is being read, and he's also addressing children. He's not how Aristotle addressed the father or the parents to the child. He is addressing the children as they are. This means that they are a part of the covenant community. They are there within the gathering as this thing is being read. So whether Epaphras or Onesimus or Tychicus, those are all names from the end of chapter 4, are the one reading it. This is telling you the kids are there, and as they're there, they hear, hey, make sure that you listen to your parents because this pleases the Lord. Remember, this is here. He is referring back again to the submission, the mission of Christ, that we are all in submission to Jesus. Verse 21, now he gets to fathers. Fathers, do not embitter your children, or they will become discouraged. The word here for embitter is actually a different word than what we saw earlier with husbands and wives. For this is pleasing to the Lord. Fathers, do not provoke. Do not what we call stir to anger. Do not stir the pot or arouse their passions, so to speak. We don't want them to be without passion. We don't want to squash that. And I can say that here what Paul is saying is, maybe what he's saying to me is, don't be the one that has to continually go back and make yourself feel good by letting them know. So let's say one of my kids does something wrong and you go back to them and you tell them, hey, this is what was wrong. This is what you need to do to fix it. Here is the punishment consequences. You don't have to continue to reiterate that to make you feel good. Like, I will be mad and I will say something and then I'll walk away and then I'll turn right back around and be like, well, I'm not done yet. Like, Paul is saying, don't be that person. Don't be that person that continually goes back. And he says, because you don't want them discouraged. Now, the embitter is the stir them, provoke them, and the discouraged is the word and then passion in the Greek. You don't want them to be without passion. Thymosin. Thumosin, if you're in the Greek. So as in without passions. You don't want them to continually be beat down so that they may be obedient, but they are only doing it out of fear. Fear is not the impetus for a household within the Lord. Love is, and trying to find that balance is absolutely hard. You don't want them to be completely scared of you. They should have a healthy fear, but not scared of you necessarily. And you also don't want the modern day like that you're not just their friend. That is not what Paul is pointing at either. Okay, let's continue on to the bigger section. And this will seem a bit foreign for most of us, but let me wrap it in a little bit of context. So, okay, back to the English. Now, slaves, obey your earthly masters in everything, and do it not only when their eyes are on you and to curry their favor. Notice Paul is saying, slaves, obey your masters because slaves were a part of the societal system. And don't just obey them when they're watching you. Do it all the time. This is a character issue that he is pointing out. Don't just be the one that looks good on the outside and on the inside you're going to do whatever you want and sneak around and you're not going to listen when you don't have to. He continues, but with sincerity of heart and reverence for the Lord. So here he is pointing back once again that you are not serving that master for that master's sake. You are serving for the sake of the Lord. He doesn't come in and say we should abolish slavery and all that, because what he's saying here is about 10 steps outside of the norm of what was considered societally okay during his time. I'll finish up this section, then I'll give you some context. Whatever you do, work at it with all of your heart. Remember, all of you, that this is a character issue. as working for the Lord. Points it right back to the Lord again, and not for human masters, since you know that you will receive an inheritance from the Lord as a reward. Let me just highlight inheritance. Slaves don't get inheritance. And so he's giving them something to look forward to. This is, he's saying your inheritance is in the Lord. This is the thing that you strive for, that you still do get something in the end. You're not just working for no reason. Anyone who does wrong will be repaid for their wrongs, and there will be no favoritism. Paul is kind of rounding this section off by saying, when you are mistreated, when things do not go your way, when it is not how you would like, when somebody gets favoritism and it's not towards you, or if you are not living in the right proper kind of Christian order here, and you are trying to do things just to curry favor, but not to actually please the Lord doesn't have favoritism. And so he looks at those that are wrong, and those things will be repaid. Ultimately, Paul is saying we are under the submission, under the mission of Christ, and Christ is the one that will take care of things in the end. It is not our responsibility. Now, that should be freeing for someone that is a slave in the first century and moving onward. This has a lot of implications because when we look at it in the modern context, we don't remember that the vast majority of slaves in the Roman world were through military conquest, through war. Rome comes in and they take over a certain area, and people are taken in as slaves. There also, which is what we have seen throughout kind of history, so that is prominent, but there is also this element of you are also slaves, or sometimes translated bond servant, even though it is the same Greek word, doulos, that slave is slave. We just like bond servant better. But the idea of bond servant is you are repaying a debt. Now, here's where this can apply to all of us. If we are not self-sustaining, self-sufficient, self-employed people, if we have, just think of it, if you have a debt to anyone, if you have a debt on your mortgage, if you have a debt at the bank so that you can buy supplies for whatever your job is, even if you are self-employed, you are a bond servant to them. They hold a note that is over you, and you work so that you can pay it back. Here's where we can look at this and go, not just slaves, but I would equate it to modern day that we are all bond servants, that we are all indebted to someone for the majority of our lives. Not every single person, maybe not Dave Ramsey, but the majority of us have debts out there, and we are working to repay those. They're just not through a specific master that we work for. We don't go to our employer and ask for money and then say that we'll work for that money. We go to the bank, and the bank is really the one that holds all of those things. But here we read slaves, and what we should also hear is when you go to work, wherever that job is, do it to the absolute best of your ability. Not just when your boss, your manager, whoever is around, but all of the time, because we are all indebted to someone, and we all come under the lordship of Jesus, and he does not show favoritism. So if you are at work and somebody gets a promotion and they didn't deserve the promotion because they are the brown-nosing type and they're the ones that only do the good things when somebody's looking, that is not for you to handle. You continue to be faithful, serving in love, with gentleness, compassion, all of those different things Paul mentioned earlier. And then he moves into masters, the beginning of chapter 4. Masters, provide your slaves with what is right and fair, because you know that you also have a master in heaven. Here, Paul is bringing it all the way back down that even if you are a master, and I should say, the word for masters here, I'll just click on the Greek so that you can see it. He goes through, and this word for master is actually kurios, Lord, in its different tenses. It's not, okay, I got to switch over and go to the next chapter in the Greek. Masters, kurioi, this is the plural of kurios, master of lords, and lords know that you have a lord that is over you. So do things because you have a Lord in heaven. Here, I think Paul is using this kind of play on words back and forth of what we translate as masters, of you have a Lord. There is a singular Lord, and you are accountable to him. So if you are a Lord, are a master, you should treat all of your people with respect and dignity, and don't show favoritism, that you should be following after the putting off and the putting on that Paul mentions earlier. I think that's pretty good. We're probably about 30 minutes in. And so we have husbands, wives, children, parents, and slaves and masters, or employers and employees. Next time we will knock off the last chunk of chapter 4. That'll be looking at Paul's little final words about prayer, and then Paul's final greetings to all of the different people, where he plays a little church bingo so that they can get to know who he is and who they are, or at least him to identify as one of them, in quotes. Hope you all enjoy. Till next time.